Hi everyone. Welcome to Active Engagement Strategies for Success. I'm Laura Candler from Teaching Resources, and many of you probably know me from my website where I have an online file cabinet for teachers. You might be wondering why the title of the slide says Part 1, so I need to tell you a story. When I began compiling ideas for this webinar, I quickly realized that I had far too much content for 1 hour. There's just really too much to share, and I'm really passionate about the topic of active engagement strategies. So after I thought about it for a little while, I decided to create a second half to the webinar. So today is part 1, and part 2 is going to be on August 20th, and I'll tell you at the end of the webinar how you can get signed up for that. And I just think it'll be more relaxing to share ideas and to allow time for you guys to share your ideas in the chat as we go along. We won't feel quite so rushed, hopefully. So today's webinar is actually going to focus on some real basic active engagement strategies, and I'm going to be highlighting whole class engagement strategies and ideas for working with partners. Now, if you've been using cooperative learning for a while, you may find these to be somewhat basic, but I hope you'll hang around with us and maybe share some of your strategies and maybe some tech tools and things that you're now using to replace some of the strategies that maybe you learned a few years ago. And then the second part, part 2, is going to focus more on higher level things, teamwork, and things that are a little bit more in depth. So let's get started. First thing we're going to do is a couple of little getting to know you things. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and then I'll learn a little bit about you. We'll take a look at our webinar objectives, and the main part of the presentation is going to be lots of active engagement strategies, and then we're going to have a prize drawing at the end from those of you who are registered for a pack of these active engagement products and books from some bloggers that you probably know, and we'll take a closer look at the end of the webinar. All of that will be done in 1 hour. We'll just keep a watch on the clock, and I promise you we will do the prize drawing before the at the very end of the hour. And then after that, we usually hang around for a while for a question and answer session, and a lot of times that's the best part of the webinar because people ask great questions, and it kind of prompts me to think of things, and it prompts other people to add things to make the content even more valuable. And I do want to thank my moderators, Peggy George and Francie Kugelman. They are working hard behind the scenes, answering questions, helping people when they have technical problems, and also Peggy will be collecting the questions as she sees them come up and saving them to the end of the webinar. So there is really no way while I'm teaching that I can be watching all that's going on in the chat area and trying to remember your questions. So Peggy will be doing that, and Francie will be helping out too. Okay, I like to just start with like a very quick video welcome. I'm going to turn on my video camera and just say hi. Hi everybody. I don't really like to leave the video camera on while I'm teaching. It's sort of distracting to me, and it would probably be distracting to you, but I did want to just welcome you personally to the webinar. And let me just tell you a little bit about myself. I do have this website, lauracandler.com. Many of you probably have been to my website and you know about it, and you've dug around in my file cabinet and found lots of things that you can use in the classroom. You may not be aware that I also have a blog, Corkboard Connections, and my blog is where I explain things a little bit more, and it's up to date, gives a little bit more detail than what's on my website. I taught upper elementary students, mostly 5th grade, for 30 years before retiring a few years ago. I really love teaching. I miss the kids, and when I was putting together this webinar and saw the pictures of my students, which you'll see throughout the webinar, it was really sort of tugging on my heartstrings and making me realize how much I miss being in the classroom, but kind of got to a point where I couldn't do it all. Something had to go, and I had been in the classroom for 30 years and I was eligible for retirement, so that's the option I took. But anyways, both of my the page and the blog are really good resources for you, and I'll be sharing with you things that you can look for on them. But I also wanted to talk to you about a couple of other resources that are not mine, but that I highly recommend in terms of this webinar content especially. The first one is Kagan Cooperative Learning. How many of you have been trained by Kagan, or maybe you just are aware of it? In fact, you can use, if we could, Peggy, if you would switch the polling tool back to the check, the green check and the X, that would be great. But for now, people can type in the chat room. But Kagan is awesome. It is where I received my training. And this book, Kagan Cooperative Learning, is like, I don't know, like the definitive book for me on cooperative learning structures and strategies, and I highly recommend it. I also really recommend their training and their workshops. Really like a life-changing experience to get trained through them. Some of you may not be aware that I'm actually a Kagan author myself, and I have written these 5 books for Kagan. But I want to make it really clear as I start the webinar that this webinar is not a Kagan. I'm not representing Kagan at all. I am not representing Kagan in my role as an author. I'm just sharing with you these resources, and honestly, just a quick little webinar that I'm doing with a wide variety of strategies from everywhere is nothing compared to taking actual training from Kagan. So it's something, if you ever hear of a Kagan workshop near you, sign up for it because it's great. Another resource I want to share with you is whole brain teaching. And this is one that I didn't know about when I was in the classroom, and I wish I had. It sounds awesome. Every time I put something about it on my Facebook page, everybody goes crazy recommending it. And I got such a great response from it that I actually contacted Chris Biffle, the director of Whole Brain Teaching, and asked him if he would write a guest blog post for me on Corkboard Connections. And he actually wrote a whole series. There's one left to go, but it's an outstanding series. And I see Peggy just popped the link in the chat area for that. And Peggy, I don't know if you've already put it in the chat, but I should mention it because the chat's going really quickly. But you've probably already put in the link in the chat area, a link to a page where I typed up links. Like every time I say, okay, you can find this on my website, or you can find this, here or there or whatever. There's a whole 2-page Word document, and Peggy's adding links as we go, but there's also a document that you can download and be able to use later. So just wanted to recommend these 2 resources before we get started. Okay, I'm keeping Peggy really busy now because I'm going to ask her to turn the whiteboard tools back on. We want you to use the laser pointer or starburst to mark the spot where you are right now, and then type your location into the chat box. And as you're doing that, I'm going to be taking a look at some of the comments that you've been. Lots of people in the U.S., but we see folks from some other places too. If you're not in the United States, put in the chat box what time it is where you are so we can appreciate your terrible sacrifice in staying up or getting up early to be with us. It's wonderful to see people from all over. This kind of collaboration is so amazing. I'm going to leave it up there just a little bit longer because it looks like a few people are still adding. Okay, I think we have one more slide for using the tools. If you would take a look right here, I'm going to be sharing a lot of cooperative learning strategies with you today. So underneath each image, could you kind of try to put like a, see somebody's already done a little starburst like under the image that describes how much you use cooperative learning, like very little, a couple of times a week maybe, or like, all the time, several times a day, you're just using it all the time. This is just mostly for me, not really for you, but it kind of helps me have a bit of an understanding of the group today. So it looks like we have lots of people who are on all levels. Those of you that put several times a day, you may find the things that I'm doing right now to be a little basic. I hope you'll learn something new, but I really hope you'll stick around and share some of your strategies too. And then part 2 may have a little bit more in depth about actual teamwork. Today we're just going to mostly be focusing on partner work. Okay, thanks. Peggy, if you wouldn't mind turning off the tools before I go to the next slide, that would be great. I told you I'm keeping her busy. so wonderful to have great help to keep things going smoothly, because I definitely could not do this myself. Okay, let's take a look at our objectives for this session. First, we're going to explore the meaning of active engagement. Then we're going to just be discovering some quick and easy strategies to engage students using partner activities. Near the end of the webinar, we're going to learn how to make any lesson better by including some of these strategies. And most of all, you're going to be sharing your own strategies and tech tools and tips for increasing engagement. And remember to mark your calendars that part 2 is going to be on August 20th. Okay, so in the chat box, it's your turn. What do you think of when you think of active engagement? And I'm going to take a minute here to look and see. What does active engagement like? Maybe give an example. Think about what it is in your classroom. What would it look like if somebody came in there? I'm reading. Yes, great strategies, kids working together. Whoa, it's going so fast I can hardly read it. I saw controlled chaos. I love it. That is true. It seems sometimes like chaos, but when you're in the room, and it is much more controlled a lot of times than what people realize. Okay, so I want to tell you a little bit about what this webinar is about. I agree with the things that I saw there, and I'm going to show you some things that I think of when I think of active engagement. I think of hands-on activities, like this is a picture of my class creating landform models to study soil erosion. I think about things like measuring real-life objects. Around Halloween, we get pumpkins in and we're measuring them. I think about using math manipulatives to explore decimal concepts, because even in 5th grade, a lot of kids don't have the foundation that they need to have. I think about role-playing in social studies. This was some little play that the kids were doing about a book, and this was about caveman times, and I believe the bear on the side was supposed to be a sloth. So definitely kids are actively engaged that way. Think about learning centers and games. These are all things that I think about with active engagement, but when I started thinking about the webinar, I thought, you know, all of these things that I've shown you, you could spend a whole hour on each one of them. But behind them all, and kind of underlying all of these things, are some strategies that are really quick and easy and don't take a lot of work, but can get your kids actively engaged. And that's what we're going to do today. So we're not going to be talking about some of these things that I've just shown you. A lot of people are aware that those are active engagement, but I'm going to share with you some strategies that you can use every day in just about every activity. So think about something for a second. Does hands-on always mean that learning is taking place? Have you ever had an experience where you did a hands-on activity and then later you realized the kids didn't get anything out of it except they had fun? I experienced that so many times as a teacher, where we did activities in the classroom and then later I realized that they still weren't getting the concepts, and I realized that there was something that was missing from those lessons. And that was what I called minds-on. Hands-on and minds-on are both important. And there are a lot of strategies that can be used to make sure that kids are not just doing hands-on activities, but they are having their thoughts on it. You know, they're analyzing, they're talking, they're discussing, they're taking it to a higher level. Sometimes kids can be sort of playing in science, but they're not really thinking about what they're doing. So hopefully some of these strategies will help you add the minds-on component. I bet you could make a list of 100 active engagement tips. I've seen so many great ones all over the internet, but these are ones that I'm going to be sharing with you as a part of the things that we're doing today. First of all, you've got to have effective classroom management practices. Teaching social skills is so important, especially if you're going to get kids to work together academically. You've got to start with the social skills. Teaching interactively, providing opportunities for movement, using technology effectively, and also learning to balance cooperative learning with independent work. Now, I went through those quickly because these are things that are going to be in some of the strategies that I'm sharing with you, but these are sort of overarching rules, I guess. So just starting off with how to increase engagement. These are 4 areas that we're going to be looking at, the biggest part being actually parts 2 and 3. getting started, you've got to have the classroom management and procedures in place, and I'm not covering that at all in this webinar. I did a webinar earlier, and actually last year about this time, that has information, but that's a whole separate topic, but you got to have that in place. So I guess one of the main things is to teach procedures for every single thing you do from the very first day of school. Your whole first week is really nothing but teaching kids procedures. One thing I find is most important is to have a quiet signal, because if you don't have a quiet signal and you're going to ask the kids to put their heads together and talk about something, you've got to have a way to get them back on track with you and listening. And you know, it's sort of a back and forth. They talk and then you use your quiet signal and so on. So when I taught a Common Core workshop last week, in fact I see some of the folks in this room were there with me and Pat Calfee last week. They were sharing some really great apps and things for quiet signals. I like to use chimes, but I also heard about an app called Too Noisy, and I did a little screen capture of it, and there's a little dial at the bottom there, and it kind of swings over towards the right side when the room gets too noisy, and then the happy face turns into a sad face. And you can run it on a mobile device and then connect it with a way that your kids can see it on a computer or whatever. So I thought that was a really neat thing. So I'm going to stop talking for a second and just sort of look at what's going on in the chat here. Clapping, always good. Clapping patterns. I see the class yes, classity class, yes to yes from Whole Brain Teaching. That is an awesome strategy. A rain stick, a bell, chimes, all kinds of things. The main thing is after you get a quiet signal, make sure you take time to teach it to your students, practice it, and actually use it. I know that I was guilty sometimes of doing the quiet signal and then I didn't even wait for them to get quiet. I just started talking and the kids weren't even quiet yet. And it's kind of like you have to train yourself to do the quiet signal and wait for a moment and make sure that everybody is quiet and they're listening. Another thing you need to have is some kind of whole class management system. I use this Go for Green Stoplight system with little tags in the pockets, and I'm not going to explain the whole thing because I have the directions on Corkboard Connections. It's just like a free overview of how you do all this, and then if you actually wanted to purchase the stoplight patterns and things to make it real easy, I have those for sale, but the directions are all free there. And I know some people are kind of against these types of things because they, want kids to learn to kind of self-monitor and that kind of thing. And some people feel like it's a little demeaning. I do put numbers on the pockets rather than the student's name, so that if somebody walks in the room, nobody really knows whose tag is on yellow and so on. But I really personally feel like, especially from the beginning of the year, you got to have something quick and easy in place, or you're going to have a lot of trouble doing cooperative learning activities. And later throughout the year with morning meetings and other things, you may not have to use a system like this, but I just found it to be really effective. Rather than me having to, raise my voice and threaten and all kinds of things, then when a student was misbehaving or talking or, when off task, I guess, then I would just let them know you need to go change your tag to yellow and, there's consequences and so on. But anyways, like I said, I'm not going to go through the details because it's there for you. Last year, about this time, a group of bloggers and myself got together and did a webinar called Sowing the Seeds of Success. It has loads of community building ideas, team building, class building, all kinds of things. So I recommend that you just, watch the webinar. I learned a lot from it too, from the people that I worked with. But I think a key point is, especially, as a fifth grade teacher myself, I tended to not want to do this, fun stuff right away. I wanted to just get straight into the academic content. And I found that if I didn't take time to do some of these team building and class building activities, the kids were fighting, they were fussing, they were arguing, they couldn't get along with each other. And when I took time to do a team building activity and a class building activity every day for the first week of school, and then maybe once a week after that, it just seemed like they were so much more tolerant of each other and so much more caring, and it really paid off in the end. Social skills is another area that's sometimes overlooked. We kind of assume that kids know how to act, and in reality they don't know how to act and interact with each other. I know one time somebody told me with cooperative learning that he would do more cooperative learning in his classroom, except the kids didn't know how to act. They didn't know how to behave. And I kind of was like, well, that's kind of like saying in math, I would teach more math, but my kids don't know how to do it. Like, the whole thing about cooperative learning and having kids work together is part of this piece is teaching them how to interact and how to treat each other with respect. That's a part of life, and if we don't take time to teach it to the kids, I don't know who's going to do that. So there's some specific strategies that you can use, and if you look in the lower right corner of this slide, you see a little symbol. It shows a picture of my website, and that means that there's something on my website that goes along with this slide. There's actually a whole page, step-by-step directions about how you teach social skills. First thing you do is you think of the skill that your kids are having trouble with. You know, it might be accepting differences, asking for help, any of these things, or any other things that you might think of. And then you use a little T-chart. I used to just call it working together skills rather than social skills. And I would put the skill up at the top, like active listening, and then we would brainstorm as a class, like what does it look like when people are listening actively, like they're looking at each other, they might be leaning towards each other, they might be circled up. What does it sound like? You know, one person's quiet while the other person's talking, and so on. So we would do a little anchor chart as a class. And then the next thing I would do is put them into a little activity like a think, pair, share or something where they could practice that skill. And then after we practiced it, we kind of went back and looked at the chart again and said, how did we do with our active listening? And when I taught it this way in my classroom, I did like one skill every week, and I just kind of kept the poster up all week, and throughout the week we would go back and we would practice using that particular skill. And then each week I would just pick something else that I felt like my students need to work on. Okay. I want to share with you a neat little icebreaker activity that's great for the first few days of school, and really pull it out anytime during the year. And this is one of the things in a little pack of materials that I have in my TPT store called the Back to School Super Start Pack that really gets into cooperative learning and how you get things set up. This is so simple. I mean, you don't have to buy anything for this. All you need is you know, Venn diagram on a piece of paper or a dry erase board. But the way this works is you pair students together, and I always paired kids who weren't friends. You know, I didn't let kids just pick friends. I actually wrote their names on the Venn diagrams the night before. People that it was usually somebody in their team, and I wanted them to learn to work with that person, or it might be if they were going to do a partner activity. So I would hand them their paper, and they would sit side by side, and it's great if they can use different colored pencils for this. But like Chris would name something like, I have 2 dogs. And if Tara doesn't have 2 dogs, then he writes it on his side of the paper. And Tara might say something like, hey, I was born in North Carolina. Chris says, hey, I was born in North Carolina too. You know, that goes in the middle. So you can see from the red color that Tara was the one that added that. And then by the time they get done, it looks like, actually it looks, there's like twice as many or 3 times as many things, because my students would always write little tiny print and would fill up the whole circle. They just really enjoyed it. And what I loved about this activity was kids who didn't think they had anything in common. In fact, they would tell me, Tara might say, I don't want to, you know, she might privately say, I don't want to work with Chris. He's nothing like me. I don't know any, like we have nothing in common. But it would be amazing how much they would have in common in the middle of the circle. In fact, it seemed like when kids worked together, they actually tried hard to find things that they had in common. It just kind of gave a real good, like warm, fuzzy feeling. And it was a good thing to do if you were making new teams. A lot of times I put 2 kids on together and 2 kids on another Venn diagram, and then when I made their teams of 4, they all got together and they kind of shared what they had done in their buddy Venn diagram. So anyways, it's just a simple activity, and you can do it over and over throughout the year. Okay, this is I have to say this is a really strange format for me. Normally when I'm teaching these types of things, I'm in a setup where I'm in a workshop and I'm teaching teachers, and then I say a few things, I stop, and they do the things, and I walk around and I see what's going on. It seems very strange to me to be just kind of rolling through this. So I hope you're finding it to be helpful, even though it's not my normal in-person style of teaching. The next thing about active engagement is to learn to teach interactively. And these are 4 areas that I'm going to cover. So it's just sort of like a little framework for what we're going to be going over. I just loved my dry erase boards, my little individual dry erase boards. You can buy paddles like the ones shown there from Clean Slate, which are awesome. You can purchase those boards, or you can just go somewhere like Lowe's or Home Depot and get shower board and have it cut into pieces. That's kind of an inexpensive way to go. They may get scratched up a little bit more and not last as long, but for right now, you may want to go that route. I always found it to be helpful to use boys' black socks for the erasers, and I'm going to say boys, not men's, because the little shorty ankle socks worked really well. They were small, and I got those zippered pouches that are on sale this time of year. I had one for each team, and I actually wrote the team number on it, and then inside the pouch would be each person would put a marker and a sock. And with 5th grade, the kids had to keep that with their own markers, and I have a reminder slip that I would send home with them when the markers would run dry or get lost. And there's a little freebie thing. It says Teaching with Dry Erase Boards. That's a free download on Corkboard Connections or in my Pay Teachers store. And it has lots of tips and things for using dry erase boards in the classroom. But I thought they were so important in my classroom that I once told somebody that if I had to choose between having a Smartboard and having every student have an individual dry erase board, I would pick the individual dry erase boards. And you'll see why in just a minute. I found them to be really outstanding for understanding and for assessment purposes and so on. So let me explain to you a couple of ways that we use dry erase boards in the classroom. This is Show What You Know, which is really like a whole class version of the cooperative learning activity called Showdown, which I'll get into in part 2 when I get into team things. But this is a whole class version of it. And I'm going to tell you that these are my students. What you see them doing there is more of a team showdown. I looked all over my computer for a picture of Class Showdown, and I could not find it, and I finally realized why. Because I was always the teacher guiding the activity when they were doing it, so I didn't have a camera in my hand. So this is more of a team activity. But anyways, for pre-assessment, let's say you're introducing a decimal concept and you don't know how much the kids know about decimals. So you assign a simple decimal problem on your Smartboard or document camera or chalkboard or whatever. You have the kids work it out on their own. They would not be showing each other the way these students are. They would be working it out individually. They flip their boards down, and then you as a teacher say, show what you know. And then the kids flip their boards up and you look at the answers. But a little tip here is I would never reveal the actual answer when the boards were showing because I didn't want any of the kids to be embarrassed that they had it wrong. So when they flipped their boards up to show me what they knew, I just like scanned across the room and looked to see what the kids knew, and then I would say, okay, thanks, put your boards down. But I knew, okay, you know, half the kids aren't getting this, I need to do something easier, or oh, you know, 90% of the kids got it, I need to do something more advanced. And it really helped me in my instruction to make it interactive. There are a lot of interactive tech tools now, and this is where you guys, if you have one-to-one classrooms or you have technology in the classroom and you know of some interactive methods, I don't know, you could use iPads or tablets in place of dry erase boards where kids are using a stylus or their finger and they're working problems out that way. There are online polling tools like polleverywhere.com that has a free version for up to 40 students for classrooms. Of course, these kids would have to use a device of some sort to be able to respond. Clickers, Smartboard response system. And then one that I just found out a couple of days ago is the Plickers app. I don't know if you know anything about it, but Tabitha Caro from Flapjack Educational Resources did a great video. It was actually on my Facebook page the other day. It was really popular, where it's a free program. It's really hard to explain, except that it's kind of like the idea of QR codes, but what she's holding up in her hand is like a QR code that's for each student. And when you ask questions, the kids turn the card a certain way. You can't see it, but it has like A, B, C, and D around the edges of it. And depending on whether they want to say A, B, C, or D, they turn the card, and then she scans it with her phone or whatever to, kind of pull all the answers. It seemed to me like it might be better for small groups. I don't know if anybody uses Plickers, or and if you could put something in the chat about, like how you use it, and would it be okay for a whole group, or is it more of like a small group tool or whatever. It looked very intriguing to me. Does anybody else have something they want to share in the chat about interactive tools? So far, dry erase boards, I haven't seen anything myself that you could just use index cards if you don't have dry erase boards. You could use index cards or little scraps of paper or whatever, but I really like being able to see kids work out their actual problems so I can understand what they're thinking. But I'm sure that there are tools out there that I don't know about that are great too. Okay, for whole group engagement, another thing would be to have kids work out a problem or write a response on their dry erase boards, and then let them come up and put it under a document camera and explain their thinking. And if you do something like this, of course you would put the problem out there and let all the students have time to work on it, kind of walk around and see what they're doing, monitor, and then pick a few examples that you would show under the document camera and kind of let them explain their thinking. So that's a way of engaging the whole class. Another way to engage the class is always choosing students randomly rather than having them raise their hands to be called on. Just get in the habit of choosing, like put their names on craft sticks. This is a cup of sticks that doesn't have names on it. The ones in my classroom actually had the kids' names, and I would just reach down there and I would pick the names out and call them that way. That way they sort of have to stay on their toes because they know that they might be called on at any moment. And there are some other randomizing tools, high-tech tools. Smartboard has a random tool. I remember where I used to put my students' names in, and then it would draw a name randomly. Does anybody know about the hat? The hat is really cool. When you click on pick, it kind of does a little drum roll, and it pops the name up in front of the hat there. I know it's probably hard for you to see. And it also will choose partners. If you go into a mode where you wanted to pick partners, it will pick two names together. And a lot of times I didn't like random partners, but sometimes random partners were okay. And it's kind of funny, kids might act like they couldn't get along with each other, but when the hat picked them, it was like, oh, the hat picked us. So, they were fine with that. The hat is on if you look down the corner, it shows a picture of a page. I have a page called, I think it's called Whiteboard Tools and Technology or something like that, and there's a link to it. The only problem is I don't think there's a version for the Mac. I'm sorry to say that, but I emailed the guy who created it a few years ago, and he doesn't have a Mac, and he didn't create one for the Mac. So anyways, but those things keep kids actively engaged. Another little tip about using interactive whiteboards, when I first got a whiteboard, I was very excited about it, and I thought, wow, this is really engaging, because the kids were excited about it. But then I realized that what I was doing was using it pretty much like a chalkboard, except that it would do neat things like underline and circle, and you could move shapes around and things. But it was always like one kid coming to the Smartboard, and I thought, wow, this is almost like technology is putting me a step back, because the kids are not being interactive with each other because they're all just waiting for me to call on them for the Smartboard. So I kind of put my cooperative learning thinking cap on and decided that I would try to take every activity and have the students do it on their individual dry erase board. So then I would call a student. So this is one that I did in summer school a few years ago. I was working with third graders on telling time. Does anybody know about the Stop the Clock game? It's a really neat game. It goes on a Smartboard, and when it comes up, the student that goes to the board takes their finger and they drag, or if they're doing it in front of a computer, they use their mouse, and they drag the time up to match and fit in the block at the top above the clock. Well, the kids liked it, but most of the kids were sitting around waiting for one kid to do it and kind of beat the clock and see who could do it fastest, but it was a lot of kids just waiting. So what I changed to doing was I started the app, the Stop the Clock app, and then I picked up the Smartboard pen, which froze the board. And then I numbered the clocks 1 through 5, and I had the students use their dry erase boards and number their dry erase boards from 1 through 5. And then they had to write the answers on their dry erase boards. And then when most of the kids were done, I would kind of look to see who had it correct, and I would call the student up, put the pen down, which unfroze the clock, and then let the student work it out. But it was a lot more engaging, and it really got the kids involved. So I think a combination of individual dry erase boards and smart boards makes a good pair. Okay, I want to share with you as many of these strategies as I can get through in the next 20 minutes or so. Some of them I'm sure that you've heard of that I'm going to go through, and I will go through those quickly, but just focusing on partners for right now. Let's see what we can learn. When people aren't as comfortable with cooperative learning and want to know where to get started, I always say start with partners before you start with teams. It's a lot easier to get along with one person than it is to get along with 3 other people, so the social skills are a lot easier to master. The directions for partner activities tend to be a lot less complicated. There's less wait time because you're just waiting for one other person and not 3 other people, so that means there's higher student engagement. And the kids are getting immediate feedback. So if they're not doing something correctly, the partner is probably going to catch it and say, oh, you know, I thought that we did so-and-so in class, and kind of like guide them back to doing it correctly. And I found that to avoid frustration, it's really good to pair students who work at about the same level. You would not want to put your gifted student with your struggling student because they're so far apart in their way of thinking that they're just both going to be frustrated. So it's better to pair like a struggling student with a kid who's kind of average in ability, maybe an average and high, or maybe let your 2 gifted kids work together or whatever and differentiate the tasks that they're doing. But that's just a good general rule, and generally not letting kids pick their own partners when it's academic tasks, because they might pick a partner that's their friend but maybe is not a good match for them. So think, pair, share. I mean, everybody knows think, pair, share, but I'm just going to go through the rules because maybe some people haven't been through the specific steps of it and are doing it rather loosely. But the teacher poses a question or discussion prompt and provides some think time. That's very important. At least 5 to 10 seconds depending on the question. And students think about it and then just put their thumbs up when they're ready. And you don't have to wait for all the thumbs to go up, but enough so that most kids are ready. And then pairs turn and talk to each other, talk over the answers, and then a teacher randomly calls on students to share what they and their partners discussed. So it's a process. It's not just turn and talk. There's a whole process here. So you might have a question like, maybe 2 kids are reading a story together and you say, how might the story have ended differently if the setting had been different? Support your answer with details from the text. So you give them some time. In this case, if you're asking to support the answer with details from the text, you might give them a little extra time. Or actually the next strategy that I'm going to show would probably be perfect for this. Have them make a few notes and then turn and talk with their partner about it, and then the teacher calls on a few kids. You don't have to call on everybody, but call on a few students to share some ideas. A nice variation to this is think, write, pair, share, which would be perfect with the example I just gave. you pose the question, students think and write a short response. They don't have to worry about having complete sentences or anything, just a few ideas. Their papers go face down when they're ready, and then pairs turn and discuss, and teacher randomly calls on students to share what they discussed with their partners. So once again, it's a process, but in this case, adding the written component really, you know, sometimes kids just, when you put them with partners a lot, they wait for their partner to do all the thinking. And by putting in the writing component, it makes them have to get something down before they turn and wait for their partner to tell them what the right answer is. And the third variation of this is if the kids have been sitting for a long time, mix, pair, share is a great variation. I mean, I've heard it called mix and mingle, mix around the room. There's like so many different, you know, words for this particular thing. I just tend to name my activities by what they are. So, you know, what's going on. So teacher first asks the kids to mix and mingle around the room, and then on the quiet signal, students pair up. And as a teacher, you do have to help with this process. I usually tell the kids to raise their hands until they find a partner, then put their partner down, because some kids will just kind of like hang out and they don't have a partner and they don't come ask you for help. So you have to really monitor that. And then after you know that they all have partners, they just kind of stand side by side. The teacher poses a question and provides think time, and if you've asked them to maybe bring a clipboard with them or something, they give them a little bit of time to write their answer. Then pairs turn, compare, and discuss their responses and so on. And a nice fun variation is to play music. When you ask them to mix, you put some music on and let them move around the room, and then when you stop the music, that is the signal for them to pair up. So it's just a very nice way of getting the kids up and being active. One of the tips that I had earlier about active engagement is just movement. We know that getting kids up out of their seats and getting them moving is really, really important as far as the brain and learning. So, you know, and you might say, well, I think my kids are going to be too wild. They're going to be crazy. It's going to be chaotic. Well, that's where your classroom management comes in place. I like to write the word stop on the chalkboard, and if the kids are just getting out of control, they lose a letter, cross off the S. If they don't calm down, cross off a T and go through, and if they lose all 4 letters, then they just go back to their seats, and maybe I have them write in journals to respond to the questions that they were doing, mix, pair, share. And, you know, the next time you do mix, pair, share, they're probably going to be a lot better. So, you know, it's just a process. Okay, so it's your turn for me to take a break from talking. When during your instructional day could you use think, pair, share, or a variation? So just when you share an idea, you might put your grade level in there too, like 3rd grade, so-and-so. It's not necessary, but it could be a review activity. It could be off and on throughout a lesson, like in science, they're reading and talking, then do a think, pair, share. Geography, I'm seeing. It's just something you can just use over and over and over again throughout the day. Great strategies. Okay, let's move on. Okay, remember when we were doing the Venn diagram sorting activity? Imagine if you had words on little slips of paper and you had kids work with a partner to sort them out. Now, the key here is to have some structure, because if you just give those kids a stack of cards and say, sort these out, they're going to throw them all down on the graphic organizer, and then when you come to check them, they're not going to be correct, and the kids are going to say, I didn't do that one. So what you do is you stack the cards. Let's just say you have these words and you have, like, you want them to sort them as noun. Is it a noun? Is it a verb? Or could it be used as a noun or a verb, depending on how it's being used? So you stack those cards face down. I always find face down is better because it's less distracting. One student turns over a card face up, reads it out loud, and so the student might say book. Now this student, let's say Sarah, she says, I'm going to put book in the middle. Well, maybe Chris says, what? Book is a thing. It's a noun. How could it be a verb? And she might say, well, you know, my mom was telling me about how she booked a trip to, you know, the Bahamas or whatever. So she's sharing her knowledge of vocabulary, and she said that's a verb. So it's all about the conversation that's going on. It's really not about right and wrong answers. It's really not even for you to go check their answers later, but to walk around the room and listen to the conversation. So Chris might put sing down and say it's just a verb. After they've put a few cards down, you can see that the ones in the middle really could be used as a noun or a verb, and the kids have to justify by giving an example of a sentence or something where they placed it. Just think about how much higher level this is when you do it with two kids than if you have a center and you just have kids go over to a center on their own and they put these cards down and then you go over and grade it. And you know, you might grade it one way and you might say book goes under noun and you might count it wrong, but really the kid knows that you can book a trip, and so they might know it's a verb. And so you're really missing a lot when these things are independent. So this type of activity is a vocabulary activity and a parts of speech activity that's really to stimulate thinking more than anything. What about this? What if you had the factors, had numbers like from 1 to 100 on little slips of paper? In this case, they'd probably have to put them face up. Or if you had already determined these are the factors of 12 and 20 and you had separated them out, and the kids take turns putting them, whether they're factors of 12 or factors of 20, and the ones in the middle would be factors of both. And then after they finish, they can look at which one's the greatest common factor and which ones are common factors. So another sorting activity. So you could sort on a T-chart. These are little cards from my plural or possessive task cards and more mini pack, and these have sentences with words underlined, and the way the activity is in this particular pack, it actually wasn't a sorting activity. It was where the kids had to write on their I believe it was just Showdown, where they had to write on their dry erase board PL or PS. But you could also have the kids sort the cards. You know, one person flips it over and tells whether it's plural and puts it on the chart. The other person takes the next card and puts it as possessive. And then as a teacher, you're walking around and checking their answers. This is a freebie in my Teachers Pay Teachers store. A lot of you may have done it if this is something that is at your grade level, but it's something I use with my students. They are really confused about weathering, erosion, and deposition. So I write up a bunch of examples like rain washing away soil from the hillside or waves dropping sand on the beach, and they cut them apart, and then working with a partner, they had to take turns putting them on top of the correct picture. And that was really, really helpful because there's a lot of conversation and justifying and explaining before they got through the activity. A 5th grade social studies example would be to cut up different branches of government and their functions, and then work with a partner to put the cards in the proper places and take turns. So it's just a little more actively engaging than just filling out a worksheet. Okay. So those were some different content area examples, and like I said, I know that a lot of my content is upper elementary, so if you are a primary teacher or middle school or high school, it would be great if you could put some examples in there and just put MS for middle school or HS for high school or primary, and of course intermediate teachers share your examples too. But what could you do with sorting activities? I see a lot of people putting in there that they use hula hoops to introduce the Venn diagrams. That is a really great idea. You know, having the kids like sit around the carpet and teaching the Venn diagram that way, that's great for little kids. I've actually done that. Right, and then sometimes you'll do it on a T-chart, sometimes you'll do it on a Venn diagram. You kind of have to think through it and try it out yourself. So lots of good things that you can do with sorting that engage students. Okay, I got to go quickly because looks like we're coming up on the end of the hour. I've got a few more things to share. This is a partner practice activity, which is basically a taking turns activity. I'm going to go through directions really quickly, and then I'm going to show it to you up close. So you can do this with pretty much any worksheet or textbook assignment. Instead of giving it to the kids as a worksheet to complete on their own, try this. Put your kids together and assign one to be partner A and one to be partner B. Partner A reads the first one aloud, writes the answer. Partner B reads the answer and puts a check mark next to it if he or she agrees. I'll show you this up close in a minute. If they don't agree, they talk it over, and A can change the answers because you're not going to grade something like this anyways. They switch roles and repeat, and then you're going around and monitoring and assisting. So here's a close-up of that page. If you look up in the upper right corner, as a teacher, I just add another line. So person A is Henry, person B is Reginald. And then on the left side, right next to the numbers, I have the students, or if it's little kids, you can do it ahead of time before you run the paper off, and just put A, B, all the way down so they know which one they're supposed to do. And the person A says 6 monkeys climbed the tree and puts the correct form in there. And person B, if they agree, they put a check mark. If they don't, they talk it over, and person A gets to change it. Then person B does the same thing. It goes down the worksheet in that way. So there's a lot of conversation. They're getting a lot of immediate feedback. But remember, you are not going to grade this. This would be it would be inappropriate to put a grade on this because you don't really know for sure who understands it. That's where you have to come in with another assessment later. And actually in this plural and possessive noun pack, I think I have 2 copies of everything because I'm so used to teaching this way. Like one is the practice and one is a quiz that you can follow up with later. How about measuring angles in 4th and 5th grade? Kids have so much trouble measuring angles. I remember the days when half the class would have their hands up waiting for me to come help them personally until I gave 2 kids a piece of paper. Actually what I did is I did a pre-test to find out who could actually measure angles. You know, I taught it quickly, and then I partnered the kids up with somebody who kind of had a clue with somebody who was really having trouble, and they just took turns on the piece of paper and they wrote the angle measurements in. Works well. You can use different colors for accountability when they're writing their answers. If you have an odd number of students, usually it's a student who really likes to work alone, so for that day you could just let them work alone and pair up at the end to get somebody to check their answers. You could assign problems from a textbook where the kids just number their paper down like 1 through 10 and then just take turns that way. And as I said before, this is just a practice activity, so it's not to be graded. The 4th strategy, I know I told you this is going fast at you, but this is one of the last ones I'm really explaining fully, is pairs compare. Really simple with dry erase boards or maybe tablets. Partners sit facing each other with a stack of cards face down between them. Partner 1 flips over the top card without talking. They both work the problem or answer the question on paper or dry erase board, tablet, or whatever. Like they don't talk. They both work it out. And then they compare their answers and discuss their responses, and partner 1 checks the answer key. Sometimes you might have the answer on the back on a key. They switch the roles and repeat the steps, and the person who flips over the card and checks with the answer key is going to switch for each round, but the key is both students always solve every problem. Like the leader should not be just sitting there waiting. That's really a waste to have the leader sitting there doing nothing when they can both be working out the problem. And I want to tell you how to solve the problem of answer keys, where you have an answer key and the kid who's looking at the answer key is looking at all the answers, not just one. And the answer to that problem is QR codes. Is anybody using QR codes in the classroom? They are so much fun to use and the kids love them. You can create your own QR codes at qrstuff.com. And I'm going to switch to the next page so you can sort of see what this is all about. On the backs of task cards, you can create a QR code that has the answer to that task card. And when the student scans it in on a mobile device, it actually takes them to a page that has the answer. And there is a blog post, and I don't know if I put that in the list of links, but on Corkboard Connections, there's a blog post article where I explained everything, and then a teacher's had her student, a 2nd grader, record an adorable little video where a 2nd grader explains how you scan a QR code. So you have to check that out. It's great. A lot of people, myself included, are starting to put QR codes on things. I'm glad that I didn't plan to discuss this in detail because I'm running out of time, but there's a freebie on Teachers Pay Teachers called Solve and Switch. It's kind of like Pairs Compare, but the kids pull off 2 task cards, they work both problems, they switch cards, and then they check. The complete directions are there, and if you don't want them using dry erase boards, there's like a recording page. So it's all there for you. Another thing that I'm not going to explain, I actually fully explained it in the math problem solving webinar, is an activity called Math Buddy Chat. And this is a great one for problem solving. Like a lot of the strategies that I've shared with you so far are for more like practice. They're not for real higher level thinking. That Math Buddy Chat is when you're working on math word problems and you want the students to talk the problem over before they even try to solve them. So they first talk over the problem, but they don't write anything. And then they pick up their pencil and they solve them without talking, and then they compare and discuss. So it kind of like it prompts them back and forth, and I even have like a little PowerPoint that the kids can watch to guide them through if you do it in a center. And then the last strategy is kind of a little bit higher level because there's not much structure to this, but once your kids start working well together, you can just, and this is upper elementary and middle and high school, buddy note taking. Have the kids work together to take notes. If they're taking notes on a graphic organizer from a text like science or social studies, assign the text, explain exactly what you're looking for in terms of the notes that you expect them to take. First, give them time to read the text and take the notes alone, and then pair them up and allow time for them to discuss what they already wrote down and record additional notes. So, and a variation to this would be is if the text was challenging to read, you might first have the kids do like a paired reading activity where they first read it, and then maybe they separate and they don't talk while they take notes on their own, and then they come back together and they share. So just a few final things here before we wrap up. As you've seen, you can use these activities in learning centers. There's really not too much to say about this except that partners work far better than individuals in learning centers. I think they're far more effective. We've already talked about the grading in partner assignments. You won't be grading things that kids are doing together. You need an individual assessment for that. And then I wanted to share with you how you can take an activity and make it even better by just adding in some of these strategies. Francie shared, when we were doing our run-through on this webinar, Francie shared with me about a video she'd watched on the teaching channel. It's called My Favorite No. And it's an outstanding activity. Basically, it's a middle school teacher. She has her kids solve problems on index cards, which is, I would be using dry erase boards, but she gave them index cards when they come in the morning. And she sorts the cards into 2 piles, the ones that are correct and the ones that are not correct. And then under the document camera, she takes one of the ones that's not correct, and she copies it over so that nobody can see their handwriting or their name or whatever. She copies it over, and it's an incorrect problem, and then the kids have to try to figure out what is correct. I mean, what is incorrect, and what did they do good in the problem? Why, that's her favorite no. Like, they did something good, but then where did they go wrong? And it's a great lesson, but the problem that I saw with the lesson is that when she's having the class discussion, it's just one-on-one. It's like kids are raising their hands and they're answering. And quite a few students are involved in the lesson, but quite a few students were not involved in that part of it. And so if it were me doing this lesson, I would add a think, pair, share into this part of it. So when she's taking to the class and saying, class, what is it that they did right and what is it that they did wrong, I would give a little bit of think and write time and then have them pair up with a partner and then have them raise their hands and share with the class. And I think it would really raise the level of engagement. And that's, you can just look at any activity and raise a level of engagement by adding in some of these strategies. Okay, real quick, because we're running out of time here, but type in the chat, what are some of the benefits that you see of using these active engagement strategies? I see improved retention. Every kid has to think. Oh, it's moving so fast I can hardly read it. Students teaching each other, students thinking for themselves, engaging all students. Right, and it does increase retention. Kids are happy, they enjoy learning. Okay, here's what I saw. Kind of like all of those things are wonderful, but this is what I saw in my classroom. What I saw was that when you have hands-on and minds-on, you have hearts-on. Kids start learning to love being in your classroom and they enjoy learning. When they're highly engaged and they are successful because of the strategies that you're using, then they discover the joys of learning and they're just so happy to be there with you. I had a student tell me one time when he came back to my class, he was bringing his it was open house and he was coming and his parents and sister were coming down the hall, and he kind of ran ahead and he talked to me. He said, "Mrs. Kindler, I'm so glad that my sister's going to be in your class." And I said, "I'm so glad she's going to be in my class too." And he said, "The reason I'm glad she's going to be in your class is because some teachers do some fun things, but everything you do in this class is fun." And I mean, it just about made me cry because, you know, I just felt like that was such high praise from a student, and I knew it was because it was the simple things. It was the think, pair, shares. It was the partner activities. It was the buddy sorting. It was just the fact that pretty much everything we did, unless they were taking a test or doing independent reading, was engaging, and, you know, it makes kids want to come to school. So just a quick recap. So we looked at partners today, and then on August 20th, we're going to go into teams, how to, when you have more than 2 kids working together, like how can you structure that, and some troubleshooting strategies. You'll find more information on my website. If you click on the strategies link, there's a drop-down menu, and there's all kinds of things there for you: cooperative learning, management, learning centers. You can also type things in the green box to get to anything on the site. Corkboard Connections has more in-depth details about the strategies and resources. Just a quick reminder, highly recommend both of these organizations for additional resources on active engagement. And it is time for us to do a prize drawing. So this is, I believe, 12 items from some of my favorite blogger friends that one person is going to win. And Francie, I sent you a list ahead of time. I don't know if you got it or not. You can take the microphone, Francie, if you would, and tell me, did you get that list, or do I need to do this myself?
Yes, Laura, I have the list, and I don't know if this lovely lady's here, but I'm going to put her name in the chat box. Her name is, ready? Drum roll. Vicki Sloop. Vicki, are you here?
Vicki, is Vicki here? What I did was I drew names ahead of time from people.
In the chat box. Oh, if she's not here, it's time to find another winner.
Okay, let's wait just a second. Okay, she hasn't said that she's here. Okay, all right. Go ahead, let's go with the next person. Vicki's not here.
The next person I'm going to put in the chat box is Sarah Reed. Sarah, if you're here.
Sarah here, and I sure hope you put in your login with your own name.
Sarah Miller, bummer. Okay, we're going to keep looking.
Yeah, better be quick. Sarah, if you're here, I can't believe this. These people told me they were going to be here tonight. I had put a little thing in and said, if you're going to be here, you know, fill out this form. Had about 200 people. All right, go ahead.
Okay. How about Jenny Keeter? Jenny, are you here?
Wow.
Jenny's here. Jenny's here.
Jenny K is here.
Yeah, that's it.
All right, she says that's me. Okay, Jenny K. So I've got your email address where you filled out the form, and I hope you're an upper elementary teacher. But anyways, you have won this lovely prize package, and let me move on here. And just here's a screenshot of everything spread out that's in that package. And if you want to learn more about these resources, if you look on Corkboard Connections, there's going to be a link to it where the certificate is, and you can go and check out some of these resources. And Peggy, you want to say something real quick? We want to thank Classroom 2.0 Live. I'd like to do this before we talk about the certificate.
Sure, I'll jump on just to say a quick hello. I'm Peggy George, And we hold regular Classroom 2.0 live webinars every Saturday for teachers. We took a month off, and they're starting up this Saturday. So if you would like to join us anytime, the webinars are all free, and they're held in Blackboard Collaborate, so you've already had experience with that. We have an amazing show coming up this Saturday from two women who just co-authored a great book called Unleashing Superheroes, and they are going to be talking all about what the superpowers are, and they have a great Pinterest board that they're going to share with you that tells you all about these special powers that students need in the classroom. So come and join us. We'd love to have you.
Peggy, I just noticed somebody asked what time. I don't know. Did you say what time it is? I missed it if you did.
I put the link in the chat, and you can go there and find out any time zone, but it's noon Eastern time.
Okay. So just Google Classroom 2.0 Live 2, and we can put a link on the page that I'm about to show here where the certificate is, Peggy. I just need to remember to do that for people. Okay. Actually, that prize package wasn't just upper elementary. I don't know why I said that. It had primary things in it too. All right, these are the artists who are responsible for the cute little artwork that I have through the presentation. So check out their materials if you're putting something together. All right, let me tell you about the attendance certificate. I want to thank you for attending part 1 of the session. There's going to be a survey that pops up for Classroom 2.0 Live when you exit. Don't fill that out. That's part of Classroom 2.0 Live. That is not how you get your certificate. I'm going to show you on the next page how you get it. And I did want you to know I have an active engagement Pinterest board that has lots of great things, and be sure to check that out. All right, here's how you get the certificate. There's the link at the top, lauracandler.com/webinars/AE for active engagement webinar PHP. And if Francie or Peggy wants to put that in the chat. And then I made a little short bit.ly URL if somebody wants to just type it in. And on that page, if you notice down where the purple arrow is showing, it says click here to register for the second part of this session. You might as well go ahead and register if you would like to come and join us on August 20th. Now, I am going to leave this on the screen because people always ask me to go back to it while we do our question and answer session. And somebody put in the chat, laurachandler.com. That is not, it is Laura Candler. So that link is not going to work. So just so you know, it's no H, lauracandler.com, webinars, AE, webinar, PHP. Okay, so Peggy, I have not even had a chance to go over there and peek at the questions. I'm now looking at them. Okay, did you want to just call some of them out to me in particular, since you might have seen some of the same things kind of come up over and over?
Sure. And Laura, to be honest, there weren't a whole lot of questions because people were so busy helping each other by sharing their great ideas.
Great. That's
so
fine.
We are definitely going to want to publish the chat so they can recapture all of their ideas.
I know,
but there were
great.
just a few questions.
Okay.
One person wanted to know, was Nimi, wanted to know what kind of stoplight system you can use if you teach 8 different classes, so the classes rotate through her classroom.
Okay, that is actually an easy question because somebody asked me that just the other day. If you remember with the stoplight system that I showed you, I have numbers on the pockets. So in each class you have a roster and each student is assigned a number in your class. And so every day when a class leaves, you might have a student, the first student that walks in for the, let's say you have first period, you set it up yourself, everybody turns to green. And then during that time period, if there are kids that are off task or whatever, they turn to yellow, they turn to orange, you have these consequences and so on. At the end of the class period, just whip out your roster and maybe like make a yellow dot next to the kids' names that turn yellow so you can remember, or an orange dot or whatever. And then you set all of the tags back to green, or ask one of the first students that comes in the room, can you put all the tags back to green? So at the end of every class period, you're just switching all the tags back to green. So it's easy, easy, easy. And if you use a clipboard roster, which is what I did, and I just got like a orange, yellow, red highlighter, and I just kind of like put a dot next to her name. That way at the end of the week I could look and say, okay, this child was on yellow every single day, so might need to send a note home to mom and dad or something like that. Okay. I see another question.
Fantastic.
Okay.
That was great. Someone also wanted to know if you, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Okay.
Christina wanted to know if you have any sample icebreakers appropriate for upper elementary.
Well, the Buddy Venn diagram is definitely appropriate for upper elementary, but the book that I have called Back to School Super Start Pack has a lot of different activities and things that you can use, and there are also things in the, pretty sure in that webinar we did, which is a free webinar, and on the Caring Classroom page on my website. Go look in the cooperative learning part of my website, and there's loads of them. And Kagan has a whole book on class building in team, 2 separate books. Great, icebreakers. So there's lots of them there that are appropriate.
Okay, I'm going to try this again. Our voices were overlapping there, so
yeah,
we had a bit of a gap.
You. That's weird.
Yeah, you were talking the same time I was. Okay, well, we'll try it. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Nicole wanted to know about the shower boards and if they actually last. Can you give any experience with that?
It depends a lot on how well the kids take care of them. I actually used to have like a parent or somebody make something that was like a little pillowcase pocket for each board. And I just buy fabric real cheaply, and I did it myself one year, but it was a lot of trouble, and I can't really say. The kids kind of tend to be rough. They leave them around on the carpet when they go play a game and things like that. And for me personally, I would only get a couple of years out of them. There are some nicer ones that you can buy that you might last longer, and you can also use. Francie was talking about Donors Choose, like Clean Slate Concepts. You can get. And there's probably other companies too. You can get dry erase boards through Donors Choose grants if you're in the United States in a public school.
Great.
I always just use shower boards. Okay.
Okay, and Dee wanted to know, with the AB model, what do you do if you have an odd number? Do you make a C?
Okay. With the AB model, if you have an odd number, you have 2 choices. You can make a C, but sometimes that slows things down in a group, and usually what I do is have one person who likes to work all by themselves. They'll just for that day, maybe it's because somebody's absent or something, and one student on the team who's like a strong student will just do the worksheet on their own, and then they'll check it with me or somebody else. But I wouldn't let the same student do that all the time. I have done ABC, but there's a little bit more wait time in there. So just kind of depends on the class. I see a question in here because I'm looking through where you posted them, and I want to answer one because I think that I was talking so quickly I really didn't do a good job on this part. The question was, how do the kids know if they got it correct if you don't show the answer? And I really didn't explain. This was on the show What You Know. I didn't mean to imply that I don't show the answer. What I was saying was, I don't reveal the answer until the kids put their boards down, but we do show the answer. Like I'll say, put your boards down, and then I might call on a student to bring their board up who did get it right and say, can you show and explain how you got it? Then they go back to the sheet. Then I might get another student and say, could you come up and explain how you got your answer? So I always give the answer. It's just that I don't want them to be embarrassed. Like if they're all waving their boards in the air and then I put, the answer is 25 7/10, then all the kids who didn't get that are going to be embarrassed because they're waving the answer around and it's wrong. So I always let them put it back on their desks sort of for privacy's sake, and they just keep it face up so they can see it. And then, we do go over the answer. So I'm glad to see that question. I'm glad you captured it, because I really don't think, it's really hard in this kind of setting where I'm not able to take questions during the presentation, just sort of rolling along for an hour. So I'm glad we have this part at the end.
Yes, and Laura, really, that covers most of the questions except for a very big chunk of questions related to QR codes. And there's so much interest in that. You just may want to either do a separate webinar on that or put that in part 2. So just be thinking about that. But there was lots of interest, and people were wondering about the tools and exactly how that all works.
We're some people giving some good answers about this, because the thing is, like with the QR codes, that's not something that was around, that's just like a relatively new thing. So for me, I may not be the best one to answer those questions.
We can find somebody that has all kinds of answers to that question.
Right.
And so, as a matter of fact, we've had a couple of webinars on Classroom 2.0 Live, and if you go to the archives and recordings, you could actually watch the whole presentation and get a live binder full of links all about tools for QR codes.
You know what? I think a really good idea would be for me to send that link out to people. And to also to put it on that page that has the webinar certificate, and then that way, because I don't want to take time in the next webinar. You can see I'm in a total crunch for time, and the next one's going to be just as bad. But these are really good questions. But if there's already a great webinar somewhere that they can watch the recording, and also Tabitha Caro who did the Plickers thing, she has tons of great free webinars where she explains so many things and has so many resources, and I would recommend that you look on her blog to learn about using QR codes in the classroom.
All right, so that's it for the questions, so you can wrap up.
Okay, good. I see somebody put maybe it should be 3 webinars on engagement. Maybe there should be 10 of them. I know it's like there's so much to do, but I would highly recommend people going to check out like the Kagan training and things like that, because in a webinar I can only dip into, and these aren't all like Kagan things. I'm definitely not just sharing Kagan things, but if you go get training like that, you learn a lot of these types of things and you experience it in the workshop setting, and it's like being in a classroom. So okay, I'm just letting it hang here for a second and looking. Somebody asked about how to save the chat box. You want to explain that? Even though I always save the chat and put it, I will send them a link to that later, but if somebody wants to, you want to go through that with them right now, Peggy?
I'd love to do that, because then they'll have it right now before they leave the session. We'll post it later, but they can do it now. So you can save the whiteboard, and what it will save as is a PDF file. So you go up to File in the very top menu, all the way at the top above the whiteboard where you see Blackboard Collaborate. You go to File, Save, and Whiteboard. And under Whiteboard, you say Save All Pages, and then you select File Format as PDF. That's the only one you'll be able to read later. So be sure to select PDF, click on Save, give it a name, and then remember where you saved it, to your desktop or wherever you saved those things. Now to save the chat, and this chat is loaded with great ideas, do the same thing. Go up to File, Save, Chat, give it a name, watch where you're telling it where to download, and just click on Save. It will save it as a .txt file, so it'll open on any computer. It's strictly a text file. Okay?
Thanks, Peggy. I've been just kind of scrolling through some of the questions, so I just wanted to mention a few things before we go. One is the webinar is definitely recorded. Somebody asked, am I going to repeat it? No, this one will not be repeated, but you can watch the recording. Someone said they tried to type their name on the certificate and they couldn't, so my answer is print it out. Write your name on the certificate. Like, I'm not trying to be smarty about it, but I don't know why. You know, it's a PDF. Maybe if it's on a mobile device and you're printing from there, you might not be able to use that feature, but you can just print it and just write your name on it. It doesn't have to be typed on it. Some people said they're having trouble getting the certificate. I'm not really going to be able to provide email support for people getting certificates. All I would say is watch the recording later, really zoom in on the, and there's links that are provided in the chat area. You can click on those. I think there was one of them was incorrect because somebody put Chandler, but most of them should be correct, and you know, you should be able to get to it from there. But in general, if somebody emails me and says, I watched the webinar, can you send me the link? I'm going to say, go back and watch and look for the very part where it is, because, you know, I don't want to be just sending the certificate out to people who are emailing me who may or may not have attended. So I don't mean to be rude about that, but I just want to let you know. If you bring it back up later, I'm sure you'll be able to see it. Okay, I think we're good to go. I really enjoyed it, and I appreciate all of you guys being here and hanging out till the very end, and hope some of you will join us again on the 20th. And thank you so much, Francie and Peggy, for all of your help today.